Hey everyone, it's Cam with another tutorial for outofpaint.com, and this tutorial will be on the process of how I created a character illustration in Photoshop. It's a female tribal hunter. The entire process took about 5 or 6 hours, and I'll talk a bit about the storytelling behind it, the techniques used, and just a bit about character design in general and concept art. So when beginning this illustration, I started out with a rough sketch of the character to get a basic impression. You can see there's enough detail there to allow me to continue. I then build up with successive layers the line drawing, and then can add more detail with the costume and other features, and also giving a rough impression of the background. The decisions that I make throughout the process are really all to do with storytelling. Anything that will help me tell the story visually as I go will be what I put down. For instance, the decision to give her a crocodile head is that she is a hunter, and also that she wears this to intimidate others and to keep others at bay, since they probably won't mess with somebody that can take on a crocodile. It also gives her protection from the harsh sunlight. So a lot of the studies and things I've done in the past come into play here. So figure drawing, anatomy study, and also studying different materials, and just keeping an eye out all the time for different things that may interest me. And then when I go to sit down and draw, a lot of these things will be brought into the piece. So she'll be wearing things like leather. I've given her like bone armor around her shins and her feet, and that would protect her from crocodile bites and other nasties. So as I mentioned, every decision is really the storytelling. So when people look at the piece, they can understand the character's background and also understand like who she is and what she does by the costume. And also, I guess her mannerism or temperament by the pose. So I guess she's pretty cool, calm, and collect. Very confident. And also very comfortable in her environment. So I imagine the environment that she inhabits is, I guess, a harsh one, since she probably couldn't grow many crops. It's more an environment where you have to hunt to live. So very kind of rocky, mountainous, and then with river channels. There's nothing wrong with looking at reference. when starting out, it's definitely necessary. And you'll find the more that you do studies and the more that you grow as an artist, that you'll be able to do a complete piece without relying on reference too much. And the drawbacks of using reference would be sometimes you end up copying a photo rather than creating an image, or you may use reference material for the environment or anything like that, and then end up copying the composition, but the composition of that particular photo may not work properly for your piece. So my best suggestion to eliminate that problem would be to get the rough sketch down and the composition laid out, and then only using reference to get an impression of the details that you're looking for. So rather than look at or try to find an image that has the exact composition that I'm looking for, I may just look at reference to get or to answer questions about color and texture. And in this case, I looked at reference just to figure out the connection between the two halves of the crocodile head. So any questions you may have, like if you hit any walls throughout the process, it will help to look at reference to continue on. Now this stage is working in values, and this is on a new layer. I like this process since I can work out the values without getting caught up with colors at this stage, and it helps me to work out the lighting and where I want the emphasis to be. Since value is an important part of composition in leading the eye to where to look, and main shapes of value really form the composition. And again, the decisions for the lighting is again the storytelling. So the story in my mind is that it's kind of mid-afternoon, that she's looking for something to hunt, but also patient at the same time, just scoping the area. She may see something in the distance, so she's just patiently waiting. Perhaps she's standing there considering where she'll go next. So on a new layer, I'm coloring the lines. That's just done. I copied the lines, the black lines, but then I've locked transparency to allow me to color the lines without going outside of what I've already painted. The option to lock transparency is that square in the layers menu. And these color layers are done on new layers with overlays and adjusting transparency so it's not too strong or too intense. And some layers are done with multiply as well. So that's really up to your own discernment as to what looks best. And I'm keeping the layers that I build up separate from the layers that I build up for the environment, so that I can keep everything within the character and keep things separate in case I want to single out each other, or if I'm not happy with the background, I can get rid of it. So some considerations when creating a piece is, as I said, the storytelling, but with a character more specifically, you can think about considerations such as the expression, their attire, meaning their costume, their hairstyle, their personal hygiene, their gesture, the shapes within the vignette. So the vignette of the character is the silhouette, and then there's shapes within it. So round shapes will have, I guess, a more easy on the eye impression, whereas things like fangs and like triangular shapes will have a more dangerous impression to the viewer. But you can also put these shapes in contrast, such as with the necklace, she has the round like wooden beads, and then there's a sharp shape in the middle. So there's a contrast to those elements there. And you may see that contrast with a spider, like a funnel web spider or tarantula, where the body of the creature is quite round forms, but then the fangs really stand out because they're really sharp forms against these like softer round forms. The important thing about the vignette and the silhouette is that you want the character to be recognizable from a distance. So a good example of that would be in a video game where you would see the character in the distance and still be able to recognize whether they're an enemy or a friend. Other considerations when trying to tell the story visually, the relationship to the viewer may be the perspective that they're at to the viewer. So are you looking like from an ant's eye view or from a bird's eye view? These other considerations which will aid to the storytelling. The props and accessories, so that comes back into the costume. So in this case she's got a spear, which is probably used for hunting. She also wears leather, so that's also collections from her hunting. And then the bone armor around her feet, which shows that she hunts crocodiles, so they're probably not going to be able to bite through the bone. Other elements with the character might be scars and things like that, because if a character has scars, they've probably been in a few fights in the past. Also, how they're affected by the environment. So in cold weather, the face would have like bluish tones and things, and in this case there's a bit of like red bounce light because there's a lot of light bouncing off the rocks that are surrounding, and that would come up in the shadows and the skin tones. Also their state of health, like are they hungry, are they thirsty, do they have an illness? What is their body language communicating? Do they have like broken bones or anything like that? Do they have like animal shapes? Like is there some sort of animal pose or something going on? So in this case, she has the crocodile head, which is reflecting like a pretty menacing or intimidating characteristic. And then you can think about the background as well. Like, is it a hostile environment? Does it look dangerous? Is it like peaceful meadows, or is it like a really dark, gloomy forest? So you can think of it in a narrative sense. If you were writing a novel, you're going to use many adjectives to describe the scene and what is going on. But in this case, it's obviously visual. Choice of brushes throughout the process is just based on the material that I'm painting, so different brushes will create a quality or a texture that's better for conveying a particular material, whether it be skin or like the crocodile skin, or is it the rocks in the background. So different brushes will help me achieve better marks which are going to represent that material better. Really, you can do an entire painting just using the default hard round brush and then tweaking the hardness and the size and also the roundness. I've also thought about how it sits in compositionally. I made it more light behind the head. You can see there's almost like a frame formed by the shape of the light behind the head, and that allows the silhouette to stand out strongly. And I feel that doing a lot of master studies will help you to make better marks in your work, because a lot of my brush library has been built up by creating brush sets and different brushes that were trying to achieve a quality that I saw in a lot of master paintings, especially John Singer Sargent. I've done a lot of studies of his work in particular. So what I'm keeping in mind as I render this out is the direction of the light, and that will determine the cast shadows, where the hot spots are, and also affecting the colors since the shadows will be picking up some ambient light. And sometimes it's not using that one brush for, that rock. It's often using a combination of different brushes, experiment with different ones, and if you are trying to make a particular mark or trying to get a particular representation of that material, just make your own brush, just make something up and tweak the settings and all that. I like the setting in particular in Photoshop which has the hue and saturation jitter, because with environments, and if you look at photos, there's a lot of subtle hue shifts and saturation shifts. So by applying that to one of your brushes, and you get a nice mixture of different colors and things, and it ends up looking more realistic that way. I've also set on my Wacom Tablet, I use the Intuos 4 and 3, depending. The Intuos 4 is a bit out of service right now because the pen broke, but still using the old Intuos 3. And it's got a function like a touch slider, and I've set that to the hotkeys for reduce and increase brush size, so that helps with the workflow heaps. It just speeds up things so much. And most of the time when working, you're going to block in large shapes and then break it down to the more fine shapes, and that goes with the drawing and also the brush size. It also helps to have your brushes not just in the brush palette, but also having tools set up, because tools will save your flow, whereas if you just select brushes from the brush presets menu, it doesn't change the flow. And here I'm putting a new layer, just some cast shadows. It's a bit of a trick to do cast shadows, which is painting it all black with a multiply layer and then dropping the opacity. And I find it a really fun process. It's also a process that I can kind of rely on. Sometimes if I paint an image where I just go in and block in shapes and then paint that, there's often a lot of drawing issues and perspective issues. So the thing I like about this process is you're taking it step by step so that you don't make any mistakes along the way, in the sense that you have the drawing down properly and then you're able to work out the values and then add color. So throughout the rendering process, always keeping in mind the direction of the main light, where there's extra sources of light, such as reflected light and ambient light, and then also how other materials may affect the color of other colors, of other materials that are happening. So, for instance, in very bright sun, if you're wearing a red shirt, the bottom of your chin will light up red because it's throwing that color around. Or if it's skin, the skin may give off like a glow to your shirt, like if you're wearing a red shirt, things like that. And you can see now, changing the background, the reason I changed the background was more of a realism thing, because I was thinking about the fact that the river would carve out much of the rock. And it also gave more space to the character. It wasn't so cut in half. There was a nice gap between it there to affect the depth a bit. And you'll notice a lot of things as you do studies, such as when there's bright light, you'll get the core shadow, which is, it's a really dark part of the shadow where it's between the light and the shadow. Then often in really bright sunlight, you'll get this really saturated edge, which I've tried to paint there. I'm not sure how accurate it is. I perhaps should have looked at reference just to make sure. So all that painting was on a new layer, and that allowed me to make sure that I was making the right decision. And then if I didn't like it, I could just delete it or even erase out parts that weren't quite working. Also felt the piece was too slanted, so I've aimed to correct that by leveling out these background rocks. Also, when creating textures, it helps to use the Smudge Tool. I like the effect that I get when I place down a bunch of colors and then smudge all the colors together and then go back over with a textured brush and lay it over it so it doesn't look so milky. That effect usually works pretty well for ground textures and rocks. So you can see the details just begin to get finer and finer, using smaller brushes and working on the finer details, such as here where I'm making the scales more defined. And it probably would have helped to use more reference for the crocodile, but I didn't think it was that necessary, since not many people would get too caught up on the correct arrangement of the scales. But with things like the figure, you do want to get that correct, since people will pick up on faults with the figure much easier than something that they don't see every day, such as a crocodile. Making sure I haven't really overlooked anything. It helps throughout the process to flip the canvas horizontal, and that will kind of reset the image in your mind, and issues really pop out that way. If you can't really notice anything that way, you can also flip it upside down. If you want to find some good books on character design, I can suggest probably the best one I've seen, which is The Skillful Huntsman by Design Studio Press. You can get it through Amazon or Book Depository. The thing I liked about that book the most out of the other character design books I've seen is that it really explores silhouettes and the shapes and different drawings in trying to come up with the concepts for the character, the Skillful Huntsman. So perhaps that book influenced the subject for this also as a hunter. The most important thing as a character designer to study though is definitely anatomy. copied the background, flipped it upside down, and then erased parts of it. It's a really good trick for getting reflections, but if you want to get super accurate, reflections do have their own perspective, so you need to be aware of that. And now putting in this bird, which is more of a compositional element. Felt this space was a bit empty, and this was an easy way to balance it out. And the bird could even be a pet or some sort of companion. Although I did want to paint a black bird, I ended up lightening it because it was very dominant, especially against the background. So I wanted the viewer to first look at the character rather than the bird in the corner. And here's really where having a good collection of brushes helps. I keep my brush library quite small, just to avoid spending too much time navigating the menu. And I do have a variety of brushes that solve most problems that I encounter. And putting an overlay there, lightening it. And to finish it off, using adjustment layers, color balance, and levels, making sure the color in the shadows is consistent with the rest of the piece, and also the highlights, and also increasing the contrast a bit with the levels. Spending a bit of time getting the signature right. And there it is. So here's the entire process, step by step. Sketch through to drawing, values, color, and final painting.